NBC News Election Central in New York. Here is the news, reported by Chet Huntley and David Brinkley.
The candidates today voted early, then rested or drummed their fingers, and the people took over. And in generally good weather over most of the nation, the people were voting in unprecedented numbers. Throughout the East and in much of the Midwest, the voting rate was well ahead of what it was 4 years ago. Southern California was one exception. Reports from Los Angeles described voting there as listless and light. Both Republicans and Democrats hailed the big turnout and saw partisan advantage in it. In addition to a president and vice president, Americans today were electing 34 senators, 21 governors, all 435 members of the House, 42 state legislatures, and thousands of state and local officials. No disturbances at polling places were reported. David?
First, we're going to take a look at our big board showing the total popular vote for president. At this moment, a few states have closed some of their polls. We have about 1% of the vote in, and that is how it reads. About 45% for Nixon, 35% for Humphrey, 20% for Wallace. These mostly are in the East, obviously, and several of them in the South. Now here's some individual states, beginning with New Hampshire, where we have only a few votes, not really enough to tell anything. Less than 1% actually, and there it is, Nixon ahead, but again, that isn't enough to mean anything. Kentucky, we have 13% in Kentucky. This is one where Wallace was expected to do quite well, and at one time he predicted he would carry it. We'll see before the evening is over who carries it, but that's where it stands now, with 13% in. Tennessee, Nixon ahead, Wallace second. In Alabama, not enough votes in yet to mean anything, but of the few we do have, as you see, Wallace is far in advance. Kansas, 3% in, Nixon first, Humphrey second, Wallace third. Ohio, less than 1%, hardly enough to bother with actually. That's those are the total figures we have at this moment. We'll be back shortly with more of them. Chet?
The presidential candidates, they're campaigning over, their votes cast, waited tonight for the returns to come in. Vice President Humphrey is at a hotel in Minneapolis, Richard Nixon in his New York apartment, and George Wallace at his headquarters in Montgomery, Alabama. Senator Edmund Muskie waited in a motel in Waterville, Maine, his hometown. Spiro Agnew in Annapolis, Maryland, and Curtis LeMay joined George Wallace in Alabama. NBC News correspondents are stationed at all these locations, and they will report from them tonight.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News.
Tomorrow's scheduled talks in Paris among the United States, North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, and South Vietnam today were postponed, as expected, because of South Vietnam's refusal to attend. The National Liberation Front representatives were perfectly willing to show up and to permit the United States to represent both itself and South Vietnam. But the Americans called off the meeting, saying only that they're continuing to consult with South Vietnam and that they'll announce a new meeting date when one is decided. In Saigon, rallies sponsored by the government and the Catholics were held to protest American policy. The rallies were decorous and productive of nothing more than some shouting in front of the United States Embassy. There was little fighting, but Monday night the enemy fired 3 shells at the Mekong Delta city of Mai To. There were no casualties and little damage. President Chu called the shelling a provocative act which cast doubt on the North's promise to de-escalate in return for a bombing halt. Fighting was reported again tonight outside the Jordanian city of Amman. Bands of Palestinian commandos who use Jordan as a base for guerrilla raids into Israel have been harassing units of the Jordanian army, which is under orders to destroy them. Battles between King Hussein's troops and the outlawed commandos have been bloody. In Syria, a representative of the Palestinian movement said a full-scale showdown with Hussein is inevitable and that Jordan is on the brink of civil war. Soviet dredgers docked at the north end of the Suez Canal have given rise to reports the Russians may be planning to reopen that waterway. Moshe Dayan, the defense minister of Israel, doesn't share this view. At a Tel Aviv news conference yesterday, Dayan said he doubts Egypt will permit the canal to be reopened by anyone.
The Egyptians do not want the Suez Canal to operate while we are sitting there. They are afraid that then it will turn into normal, that we are sitting along the Suez Canal and the Suez Canal is operating, which they don't like. So the way that the Egyptians take it, not us, is that the first stage is to have us withdrawing from the Suez Canal, and only then to use the dredge and to clear the Suez Canal. And of course, to make us withdrawing by force means war. I haven't seen any indications, and I don't think that dredgers are indications that the Russians want to push us back from the Suez Canal and to break the ceasefire agreement.
West German customs authorities at the Frankfurt airport have seized 32 crates of rocket parts being shipped from the United States to Saudi Arabia. A false manifest described the shipment as machinery. German officials said the parts could be used to build 12 to 15 military rockets. The shipment came from a Northrop Corporation division in Newbury Park, California.
Now, another look at our national total vote board. It changes every minute. Still about 1%. We have some more figures, but it still stands at 1%. And there's the result, as you see. Nixon ahead, Humphrey about 10% behind him, and Wallace hanging about 19%. Here with us tonight, and all night, if necessary, are the no doubt famous four of Chancellor Vanocur, Newman, and McGee. And all of them, of course, without exception, brave, thrifty, loyal, true, brilliant, and handsome. And here are all four, one at a time, beginning with Sandy Vanocur. Sandy?
34 Senate seats are involved in today's voting. 23 are now held by Democrats, 11 by Republicans. In Kansas, where Republican Frank Carlson is vacating his Senate seat, NBC News has projected Republican Congressman Robert Dole the winner over his Democratic opponent, William L. Robinson. Our projection is based on actual votes received from the News Election Service. In Kansas, by state law, the ballot boxes can be opened during the day and the vote counted. Most polls in Kansas closed at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which is a short while from now. Two senators are unopposed. They are Russell Long, Democrat of Louisiana, and Republican George Aiken of Vermont. He also won the Democratic nomination. In Kentucky, in the contest for the Senate seat being vacated by Republican Senator Thurston Morton, the Republican Louisville judge Marlo Cook is leading his Democratic opponent, State Commerce Commissioner Catherine Peden, with now 24% of the vote reported. Now for a report on the House races. Here is Edwin Newman.
Now, we say that 435 House seats are to be filled tonight, all the House seats. That's true, but actually 37 Democrats and 8 Republicans have no opposition and must be returned. Some are well known. Wilbur Mills of Ways and Means, Taxes. Mendel Rivers of Armed Services. Wright Patman, Chairman of Banking and Currency. Texas has 11 coming back unopposed, Georgia 7, Massachusetts and Mississippi 4 each. Now, it's generally expected that the Democrats will hold the House. The division now is 247 Democrats, 188 Republicans. The Republicans need a net gain of 30 for outright control, and that would require a very big victory for Nixon. Incidentally, those figures you just saw, 5 Democrats elected, 15 Republicans elected, do not represent any change. However, if the Republicans should come close tonight, they might possibly try to swing over some conservative Democrats and take control that way. There's also a chance that the House will choose the next president in January if nobody gets enough electoral votes to win. Each state delegation would cast one vote, and the possible complications are endless, so we'd better see whether it really may happen before we begin speculating. Now here's Frank McGee.
Well, there is little to comfort the Democrats as they look across the country tonight and ponder the outcome of 21 races for governor. First, there is the fact that 13 of those state houses have been under the control of the Democrats, while the Republicans are risking only 8. So the Democrats simply are more exposed this time. Second, several popular Democratic governors are not running for re-election, adding to their party's generally dismal prospects. But third, and far more important, is the general belief that Democratic candidates for governor will be punished by voters who are unhappy with President Johnson. But even at this early hour, we have a few returns from some states. First, in Kansas, where we have about 3% tabulated. The Democrat Docking is getting 52% to the Republican Harmon's 48%. Still, this represents a shift from previous patterns, and the Republicans are happy. Very light return so far from New Hampshire, where the Democrat Emile Bouchier is getting 19% to the Republican Walter Peterson's 81%, but only a total of 29 votes involved. For 10 years, since 1958, Democratic control of state houses has been on a steady decline. Going to the wire tonight, the indications are they could lose another 6, perhaps 8 governors, and that would leave them at the lowest ebb since the early 20s. Now here's John Chancellor.
There is more to this election than just who won and who lost. 75 million people could cast ballots today. 75 million people who'll be telling us something about ourselves. One thing we will learn tonight is the true strength and the location of the Wallace movement. We will soon know if the voters regard George Wallace as a national candidate or whether they have quarantined him in the Deep South. We will know also if the politicians reached the Negroes this year and how many black people were finally interested in the American political process. We'll be able to check on that ancient alliance called the Democratic Coalition, which has kept the Democrats in power for 28 out of the last 36 years. And we may see the beginning of some new political alliances. We'll be able to gauge the effect of George Wallace's law and order speeches to blue-collar workers and Nixon's time for a change speeches to white-collar workers. We'll be able to determine the voting patterns of rich people and poor people and some minority groups, and we'll be able to check on the different regions of the country to see what their voting patterns show. All of this tonight gives us an opportunity to chart the course of change in the United States and to make some estimates about our common future. So it is a lot more than simply who won and who lost. Now back to you, David.
Thank you. Now we'll look again at the reports from the few states, the several states where we have a few scattered returns, beginning with New Hampshire. That's less than 1% actually, and not enough as yet to tell anything at all, but what we do have, there it is. Kentucky, we have a more substantial portion of the vote, 26%. Nixon is ahead, Humphrey second, Wallace third. In Tennessee, 12% of it is in. Nixon is first, Wallace second, and Humphrey is third. In Alabama, which is Wallace's own state, of course, we still have less than 1%, not enough to tell much, but even with these few figures, Wallace, as you see, is well ahead with 85% of the vote. Kansas, 3% of it. This is a Nixon state, said to be, from the beginning. And so far, it appears to be 56% for him. And Ohio, we still don't have enough from Ohio to amount to anything. But they should begin to flood in rapidly now. Richard Nixon closed his campaign last night with a question and answer session on television. And he flew today from California back here to New York, where he lives. And he will tune in the election returns in a hotel suite here in New York City. And in a ballroom downstairs, they have prepared elaborately for what they believe will be a victory celebration. It includes big bags of balloons hung up on the ceiling, ready for somebody to pull the string and let them out. Nixon was asked about a last-minute poll showing Humphrey slightly ahead, and he said, "I don't consider that reliable." He has spent most of his day in an airplane, but here are two reports on the days spent by the other candidates. From contributing editors Jack Perkins with Humphrey in Minneapolis and Douglas Kiker with Wallace in Montgomery.
The ballroom of the Leamington Hotel in Minneapolis is all draped and spangled and ready for the party. Mr. Humphrey is not here. After flying all night back from Los Angeles, he voted and now is at his home in Waverly, Minnesota. That's about an hour from here. He'll go to dinner with friends on the shores of Lake Minnetonka, and then he'll come to the hotel. And in a suite on the 14th floor, he will watch the results. As Mr. Humphrey and his aides watch the results, New York will be of particular concern. It will be one of the first early big ones. And they have felt all along that if they did not win New York, they probably could not win the election. As the momentum of this campaign has grown over the past few weeks, so has the confidence, but it should be said that they are probably more confident of a popular vote victory than an electoral vote victory. So really, they can't be sure what kind of party this is going to be tonight. Jack Perkins, NBC News, at Humphrey headquarters in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Here in Montgomery seats about 12,000 people. And about 12,000 people, all of them fervent Wallace supporters, will be here later tonight watching the election results and praying for the upset of upsets. George Wallace will be here, too, later tonight. Wallace left Montgomery this morning and rode 80 miles to his hometown of Clayton to vote. And a big group of friends and neighbors and relatives were there to greet him. After he voted, Wallace had lunch with his grandmother, then rode back here to Montgomery. And now George Wallace is waiting to see what happens. At a motel just across the street, some of his campaign workers have put 10 cases of champagne on ice, just in case. It probably won't go to waste because Wallace doesn't really need to win the election to win a personal victory. If he comes in second, if the election ends in a three-way deadlock, if he shows substantial strength outside the South. So far as Wallace is concerned, any of these things would prove his case and be a victory of sorts. Douglas Kiker, NBC News, at the Wallace LeMay headquarters in Montgomery, Alabama.
If there is a conservative trend in today's voting, it could result in pressure to reverse Supreme Court rulings on school integration. One such ruling recently held that the free choice plan, which allowed parents to send their children to any school, did not bring racial balance and was, therefore, unacceptable. The specific case involved New Kent County, Virginia. The New Kent district was ordered to integrate fully, but was given another year to prepare. Here's a report from NBC News correspondent Ron Nesson.
Even though New Kent County is only 25 miles outside Richmond, and many residents commute to nearby shipyards and factories, its outlook is rural. Of the 4,500 residents, all but 58 were born in the county. There are only 2 schools in the county. One has always been the Negro school. Under freedom of choice, white parents could have sent their children here, but none did, even though it was closer to home for some and would have saved a bus ride. The other school was all white until 1965, when the federal government threatened to cut off school aid. The school board gave ground and allowed Negro children to go to the white school if they wanted to. Some did, despite intimidation. This year, 136 Negroes attended out of 650 students. Even some Negro teachers were brought in.
We note that the Greeks gave us the idea of democracy, and that is a rule by the people, and it is the system of government that we have today. So thus we are not to take things for granted, because we have inherited these things such as democracy and the love of beauty has been handed down to us by the Greeks.
Freedom of choice, when used in the South to hold off full school integration, was struck down in a suit in the name of a 9-year-old boy, Charles C. Green. The courts allowed New Kent County 1 more year to make preparations. 1 year from now, all elementary grade children, black and white, will go to one school. All high school students, black and white, will go to the other school. Even Charles Green's father, who filed the suit, did not object strongly to the 1-year delay.
I feel personally about the delay in that it is going to provide us an opportunity to do a better job with total integration.
Will the Negro students be able to keep up?
In some situations, we would find that there would be necessity for special classes and special tutoring, even for the first 2 or 3 years, in order to have all of the students of a particular grade level properly integrated into a class. A number of persons feel they might not succeed in an integrated situation.
Well, doesn't this give some justification to the white side of the argument?
No, because the white side has not considered the fundamental problem of suppression that the Negro has experienced in 350 years of this country's life. And this is the background of the situation that the Negro is trying to overcome.
Now, this is a time when the price has to be paid for the past.
Yes, but the white person isn't paying it. The Negro is going to pay this price in extra work, and he's got to do more to produce in order to come up to the standards. We do not expect that the school standards will be lowered to satisfy the passing of Negro students or white students. But the Negro, because of his background, understands that he must work harder and put forth more effort in any situation other than his own in order to achieve the same levels of success he easily achieves in his own society.
The ruling in this little rural Virginia county told the entire South that it's not enough to give black children the choice of attending white schools. The court said it will no longer accept integration based on a system of black schools and white schools. There must be simply schools. Ron Nesson, NBC News, New Kent County, Virginia.
Here is the latest count in the popular vote for president. 1% of the vote is in. Nixon leading with 44% at the moment, Humphrey with 37%. Wallace with 19%. Certainly inconclusive, but perhaps indicative of a trend. Now, state by state in New Hampshire, 1% of the vote is inconclusive, but Nixon leading healthily. In Kentucky, 43% of the vote is in, and by projection, Nixon has won the state of Kentucky with 43% of the vote. Tennessee, 16% of the vote is in. Nixon leading with 43%, and Wallace in second place, Humphrey trailing in third. Most of these returns are from the eastern part of the state. The city of Memphis, for example, has yet to be heard from. Alabama, 1% of the vote is in, entirely inconclusive, but there Wallace is leading with 81%. And in Kansas, 3% of the vote is in, Nixon leading, Humphrey in second place, entirely inconclusive. David?
Soon the figures will be pouring in here in enormous quantities, and that big tabulator you've been seeing, the one with the total national vote on it, will change automatically every 60 seconds from now until sometime tomorrow, perhaps. And by then, the total figure should be somewhere above 70 million votes. And then we will know which of the experts, odds makers, prognosticators, pollsters, and others have been right, if any. Those who have been right will accept the congratulations, and those who were wrong will make excuses. But that is the peril or the price for trying to say in advance what 75 million people will do. It's been one of the roughest and unhappiest political years in American history. In the next few hours, or for as long as it takes, we'll see how it all turned out. Chet?
We'll return in just a few minutes to continue our election night coverage.